Hello all friends. Try to answer the question of why Trump is betraying his longtime ally's vassal and getting closer with Russia. Well, the answer is ambiguous. One of the periods in the history of our planet is called the Golden Age of Capitalism. It is also called the post-war economic boom, the period of prosperity, which in the middle of the 20th century was observed in the USA. That is, right after the Second World War. Why? Quite a lot has been said about that. While the European continent was at war, the United States was making money by supplying the warring countries. Besides, European intellectuals, scientists, who also developed the United States, fled to the USA from the war. Well, as an example, Albert Einstein, who is the most popular scientist in the West, and Time magazine called him Person of the Century. He was a migrant from Germany. In principle, the USA is a totally migrant country. But in times of wars, more people flee to it, bringing with them not only brains, abilities, labor, but also capital. At the end of the Second World War, the United States had half of the world's economy in its hands. Well, it is quite natural to call this time the Golden Age of Capitalism. And it is this period that Trump has in mind when he says, "Let's make America great again," as great as it was after the Second World War. But the question is, how will he make it great again if the world wars contributed to it then? And we'll come back to that point. After such a good fortune after 2 world wars, the United States began to take over the world, which by 1991, it had basically succeeded in doing. Taking advantage of their privileged position, the Americans imposed their currency, the dollar, as an alternative to gold, at first promising real metal in exchange for green paper. But when it became clear that they didn't have as much gold as they owed, the Yanks simply announced that there would be no exchange. And the world agreed with it, as in principle everyone was already using the dollar needle. So the United States got the right to print unsecured money uncontrollably. In order to make their economic and financial system more stable, Americans began to give away their papers, for which they paid dividends. Today, the United States has a national debt of $36 trillion. Well, for comparison, take a look at this graph of how the United States national debt was growing. It has been growing at high speed, especially recently. And besides the debt itself, it has to be serviced. Today, it costs the United States $1 trillion a year to service that debt. That's as much as they spend on defense. That's quite a lot, and it will continue to grow. Right now, US budget expenditures are greater than revenues. They have nowhere to get money, so the only thing they can do is print unsecured paper. But this is a pyramid scheme that is doomed to collapse. Something has to be done. Besides, there are other problems, such as the immigration of industry to regions of the global south with cheap labor, and the tendency of the world to abandon the US dollar. The US has recently been following the path of the ultra-globalists, but this path turned out to be a dead end, and the situation was allowed to be corrected by Donald Trump. That's why he's scrapping all these various projects around the world, like USAID, its aid to various countries. It's an ultra-globalization project. But still, the question is, if you wind it all down, all this funding to different countries, how do you make America great again, the way it was after the Second World War? Well, and in the present situation, how do you do that? The answer is obvious. Profit from some war again. A war between China and Russia is preferable, but it is unrealistic today, as it is possible to use nuclear weapons, and in general causing a quarrel between these countries is unlikely. And there is also an option to put Russia and Europe at odds, more precisely to set Europe against Russia. Many EU countries are members of NATO, which in fact is headed by the United States. According to the NATO treaty, the USA will be forced to help a warring Europe if such a war happens. How to make sure that Europe is at war with Russia and the United States has nothing to do with it? Well, just quitting the NATO by the United States. Naturally, Trump does not want to fight a war himself. So it seems there is a reason why he does not rule out that the USA will quit NATO. More precisely, he is giving Europe an ultimatum. Either you spend more money on American weapons or the US leaves NATO. And perhaps not ruling out the realization of a war plan between Europe and Russia, Trump is moving closer to Russia, as if giving the green light to the Russian army. And what does a green light mean? It means Russia will reach Lviv. The EU is unlikely to agree with it and will probably send in troops into Ukraine. It is a goldmine for America and Trump, and everything will repeat as in the First and Second World Wars. Americans at the end of the conflict will again be on the winning side, and the US, as Trump claims, will become great again, and the forces will appear to fight China, while the Chinese are still afraid of the United States and they can give in to Trump. As much as we would like to think that Trump really wants world peace, he doesn't. The United States benefits from wars. Imagine if there was world peace. All countries would have good relations. They would be developing, their economies would be growing, the currencies would be strong. They would be independent countries, producing, consuming. It would clearly be a rejection of the dollar. That is, a refusal to finance the US, and in many ways a rejection of American goods, of their influence. So, Americans need to write off their debts. A war is just what is needed. And in order to bring the probability of war closer, it is necessary to stop restraining Russia, so that it would scare Europe with its successes in Ukraine. And they'll enter the conflict. All Trump has to do is let it happen. No, I am not saying that the US plan will work and there will be a war with Europe. But it's beneficial for the Americans. And apparently they are not worried about the lives of Europeans and Russians, but about their own interests. I think this plan is unlikely, but for the US it is desirable. Well, as for Russia, in principle, it is more positive than it was. The only thing is that we need to somehow restrain Europe's desire to kill itself. They are already talking about sending 20,000 troops. They are sending money to Ukraine again. That is, so far they are acting in Trump's interests, who supports the European military on the territory of Ukraine. Let's hope that the third time Europe will not be caught in the same trap. Well, that's the way it is, friends. And that's all for now.